There is a shrub from the southern tip of Africa that has been quietly producing honey-flavored sweetness for millions of years without needing a single bee. No hive, no queen, no colony to collapse. Just a plant doing what plants do, with roots reaching into poor sandy soil and small yellow flowers that smell like warm caramel on a summer afternoon. And while commercial beekeepers in the United States watched 62% of their hives die last year, while $1.6 million colonies disappeared in less than 9 months, while the Department of Agriculture counted $600 million in direct losses, this shrub kept doing what it has always done. It produced sweetness. It produced aroma. It produced something that smells and tastes so close to honey that the first time you reduce it into a syrup at home, you stop and stare at the jar because it does not seem possible that a plant alone could give you something this familiar. I want to be clear about what you're about to hear before we go any further. Everything in this video comes from documented agricultural practice, historical records, and peer-reviewed botanical research. I am not a doctor, and nothing I say is a prescription. I am someone who has spent many years with my hands in soil, who pays attention to plants that most people have forgotten, and who believes that knowledge which disappears for the wrong reasons deserves to come back into the conversation. If what I am describing already sounds like something you have been waiting to hear, leave a like before you forget. And if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, do it now, because what comes next is not the kind of information you can find easily anywhere else. The plant is called honeybush. Its scientific name is Cyclopia, and it belongs to a small genus of around 23 species that exist nowhere else in the world, except a narrow strip of land at the southern end of Africa, in the biome known as the fynbos. It was first described in European botanical literature in 1705. Think about that for a moment. More than 3 centuries ago, before the United States existed as a nation, before the sugar industry was built, before refrigeration, before supermarkets, before anything we now consider modern, scientists were already documenting this shrub, recording its aroma, classifying it, archiving it. And then, somehow, the rest of the world moved on, as if those notes had never been written. If you walk into a grocery store today in Mexico, in Spain, in Argentina, in Colombia, the chances of finding a single product made from this plant are almost zero. The question is not whether it works. The document settled that long ago. The question is why it disappeared. The answer is uncomfortable, but it is honest. A plant that you can grow in your own yard, that produces a sweetener you do not have to buy, that comes back year after year from the same root, that does not need pollinators, that does not need fertilizers, that does not need expensive equipment, is not a plant the food production system wants you to know about. Forgetfulness is profitable. Rediscovery is not. And honeybush is one of those rediscoveries. Before I show you how to grow it and how to turn it into syrup, you need to understand the size of the problem we are facing right now with bees, because this is the context that makes honeybush matter so much in this exact moment. In the 1940s, the United States had approximately 5 million managed bee colonies. Today, that number is around 2.6 million, almost half gone in 8 decades. But the total number is not what should worry you. What should worry you is the speed of the decline. The Bee-Informed Partnership has spent more than 15 years documenting average annual losses of 40%. 40% every year. Beekeepers used to consider losses of 15 to 20% difficult to sustain. We have spent over a decade doubling that threshold without the system finding a real answer. The mechanism behind much of this collapse has a name: the Varroa destructor mite. This parasite attaches itself directly to bees, feeds on their organs and fat tissue, and while it feeds, it transmits viruses that spread through the hive until the colony cannot recover. And in 2025, researchers at the USDA Agricultural Research Service confirmed something that changes the entire equation. The mite populations have developed resistance to amitraz, the pesticide that beekeepers have relied on most heavily for control. The main shield they had stopped working. This is not just a problem for beekeepers, it is a problem for everyone who eats. Bees pollinate approximately 80% of the world's almonds, blueberries, cherries, apples, avocados, melons, cucumbers, and squash. When that pollination system is under pressure, prices rise. And when prices stay high long enough, certain foods stop being affordable for certain households. You already know which households we're talking about. So when I tell you there is a plant that produces honey-flavored sweetness without depending on bees at all, I am not telling you a curiosity. I am telling you about a piece of insurance. Now let me describe what honeybush actually is, because the descriptions you might find online tend to be vague. It is a woody shrub, usually growing somewhere between 1 and 2.5 meters tall, depending on the species and the conditions. The leaves are small, narrow, and slightly leathery, the kind of leaf you see on plants that evolved to handle dry summers and poor soil. In late spring and early summer, it covers itself in clusters of bright yellow pea-like flowers, and those flowers carry a fragrance that smells unmistakably of honey. That is not a marketing line. That is a botanical fact. Walk past a flowering honeybush and your nose will know before your eyes do. It has been confirmed safe for human consumption with documented use going back centuries. It contains no caffeine. It has very low levels of tannins, which is one of the reasons the tea made from it does not taste astringent the way many herbal teas do. And it has no known adverse effects in normal use. As always, if you take regular medication or you are pregnant, talk to your doctor before adding anything new to your diet. That is not a legal disclaimer. That is the kind of advice any experienced grower would give you. The first thing that surprises people about honeybush is where it likes to live. We are conditioned to think that valuable plants need rich soil, careful feeding, generous watering, and constant attention. Honeybush wants almost none of that. In its native fynbos environment, it grows in sandy, acidic, low-fertility ground. The soil drains quickly. Rainfall is concentrated in winter, and the summers are dry. Many common crops would fail in those conditions within a single season. Honeybush thrives there. That means the corner of your yard where nothing else seems to do well, the patch with thin, sandy soil that disappoints every tomato you have ever planted, may be exactly the spot this shrub is looking for. Bad soil is not a handicap here. In many cases, it is an advantage. The biggest mistake new growers make with this plant is kindness. They give it too much water. They feed it with rich compost. They surround the roots with manure or thick mulch loaded with nitrogen. And then they wonder why the plant looks weak, why it grows tall and leggy without ever producing the dense aromatic growth they were hoping for. People kill hardy plants by treating them like pampered ones. Honeybush does best when the soil drains quickly, when the water passes through and forces the roots to reach, when the plant is mildly stressed in the way it would be stressed in its native ground. Stress in this case is not damage. It is part of the chemistry that builds the aroma and the character of the leaves. Comfort makes a plant lazy. Effort makes a plant interesting. If you are starting from seed, there is something specific you need to understand about how honeybush germinates, because if you skip this step, you will sit there for weeks watching nothing happen, and you will conclude the seeds were dead, when in reality they were simply still asleep. The seed coat of honeybush is built for patience. In nature, those seeds may sit in the soil for years, waiting for the right ecological signal to wake up. One of those signals is fire and smoke, which is normal in the fynbos ecosystem where natural wildfires are part of the cycle. That means home growers have to imitate what nature does. There are two practical ways to do this. The first is scarification. Take a piece of fine sandpaper and lightly rub each seed, just enough to weaken the outer shell so water can penetrate. You are not trying to crush the seed. You are trying to thin its armor. After scarification, soak the seeds in warm water for several hours, ideally overnight. The second method is smoke treatment. You can buy smoke-infused water designed for fire-adapted seeds, or use a commercial germination aid made for fynbos species. If you can get smoke water, it is usually the better option because it reproduces the natural trigger more closely than scarification alone. Once that dormancy is broken, germination becomes realistic instead of frustrating. Plant the seeds shallow, keep the medium lightly moist, never waterlogged, and be patient. For many home growers, cuttings are the easier path. A healthy, semi-woody cutting taken at the right time of year, placed in a light, well-draining propagation mix, kept under steady humidity and indirect light, will root within several weeks. Once you have one strong plant, you are no longer dependent on a nursery. One plant becomes two. Two becomes six. Six becomes enough to supply a household. That is the moment home production becomes real. Not when you buy. When you multiply. Spacing matters more than people think. Give each shrub at least 1 meter of clearance, ideally 1.5 meters, because honeybush develops a wide branching habit when it is happy. Crowding it leads to weak inner growth and poor air circulation, which in a humid climate can cause fungal problems. The plant prefers full sun. Direct light is part of what builds the aromatic compounds in the leaves. In partial shade it will survive, but the harvest will not have the same intensity. Drainage is the single most important detail. If you are planting in heavy clay soil, mix in coarse sand and grit to improve drainage. If you are planting in a pot, choose one that is wider than it is deep, with multiple drainage holes, and use a sandy potting mix rather than a rich one. Standing water is the one thing this plant cannot tolerate. Watering during the first year of establishment matters because the root system is still developing. Water deeply but infrequently. Let the top of the soil dry between waterings. After the first year, in most climates, rainfall and occasional summer watering are enough. Honeybush is remarkably drought-tolerant once established, which is one of the reasons it is such a forgiving plant for people who are not constantly available to tend a garden. Now we come to the part most people care about. How do you turn this shrub into something that resembles honey closely enough to be useful in daily life? The answer is not by squeezing the plant for nectar. There is no hidden reservoir to extract. What you are working with are the aromatic and sweet compounds stored in the plant tissue itself, particularly in the leaves and tender stems. And you bring those compounds out through proper harvesting, oxidation, and reduction. Harvest from healthy active growth. You want tender stems, leaves, and where possible, flowering tops. Avoid old woody material and avoid stripping the plant bare. A good perennial rewards restraint. Take what you need and leave enough structure for the plant to recover strongly. If you harvest intelligently, the same shrub will keep giving you material year after year for a decade or more. Once you have your harvest, the next step is bruising. The leaves and stems are lightly crushed, either by rolling them between your hands, pressing them gently with a wooden tool, or chopping them coarsely. This step is essential because intact plant cells keep too much of their chemistry locked away. Bruising opens the cells and starts the transformation that gives honeybush its characteristic warm aroma. After bruising, the material goes through a controlled resting period that traditional processors describe as fermentation, although what is happening is closer to an oxidation. You spread the bruised material in a shallow layer in a clean container, cover it loosely, and let it sit at warm room temperature for about 24 to 36 hours, depending on the volume and the climate. During this time, the color deepens from green to a rich reddish-brown, and the aroma develops from grassy and herbal into something that smells unmistakably of honey, caramel, and dried flowers. If you skip this stage, you still get a usable plant material, but you lose most of the depth of flavor. This is one of those moments when patience becomes flavor. After oxidation, the material is dried thoroughly. Spread it in a thin layer in a warm, well-ventilated shaded place, and let it dry until the stems snap rather than bend. Direct sunlight during drying can degrade some of the aromatic compounds, so shade is preferable. Once fully dry, the material can be stored in sealed glass jars away from light, and it will hold its quality for at least a year, often longer. At this point, you already have a shelf-stable tea base that is naturally sweet, fragrant, caffeine-free, and asks for nothing else. That alone would justify growing the plant. But if your goal is a sweetener you can use in the kitchen, you take one more step. To make the syrup, place a generous amount of dried fermented honeybush material in a pot and cover it with water. The ratio that tends to work well is roughly 1 part dried plant material to 4 parts water by volume, but you can adjust depending on how strong you want the final syrup. Bring the water to a low simmer, not a rolling boil. A rolling boil drives off the volatile aromatic compounds and leaves you with something flat and slightly bitter. You want a slow, steady simmer that pulls the soluble compounds out of the plant gradually. Let it simmer gently for about an hour, stirring occasionally. The kitchen will start to smell like a bakery that specializes in honey cakes. The water turns a deep amber color. Once the extraction is complete, strain the liquid carefully through a fine cloth or a tight strainer to remove all the plant material. Press the wet leaves to recover as much liquid as possible. Then return the strained liquid to a clean pot and continue reducing it on low heat. This is the stage where most people make their first mistake. They either stop too early and end up with a weak, watery sweet tea, or they push too far and reduce it into something thick, dark, and slightly burnt. You want syrup, not tar. The target is a spoonable consistency, a liquid that moves slowly when you tilt the spoon, that coats the back of the spoon lightly, and that carries the aroma clearly when you bring it close to your face. Depending on how concentrated your initial extraction was, the reduction can take anywhere from 1 to 3 hours of patient low heat. When the syrup has reached the right consistency, pour it into clean glass jars while it is still warm and seal them. Stored in a cool, dark place, the syrup keeps for many months. In the refrigerator after opening, it lasts even longer. What you have at the end is not chemically identical to bee honey, and no honest person should claim that it is. But in aroma, color, sweetness, and the way it behaves in the kitchen, it is close enough to be astonishing. Drizzle it over warm bread. Stir it into tea. Use it in marinades for chicken or pork. Add it to baked goods. Mix it into homemade salad dressings. Use it in any recipe where you would normally reach for honey, and it performs beautifully. The first time you produce a jar of this syrup at home, something shifts in your mind. It is not just that you made a sweetener. It is that you produced an ingredient that almost everyone you know assumes can only come from a store or from a beehive. The first time you cross that line, you start asking different questions. If I can make this, what else can I make? If this shrub thrives in poor soil, what other useful plants have I ignored because I assumed my land was not good enough? If one perennial can give me sweetness every season, how many other needs can I reduce by choosing the right species and learning the right skills? That is how a yard stops being decoration and starts becoming a system. That is how dependence becomes design. There is also something older here that deserves respect. Long before scientific journals assigned names to compounds, and long before export markets turned regional plants into commercial categories, communities in the southern tip of Africa already knew what honeybush was for. They knew its aroma. They knew its seasons. They knew how to harvest it, dry it, and brew it. They passed that knowledge from one generation to the next. Modern research did not invent the value of this plant. It arrived late and described in technical language what people had understood through direct experience for hundreds of years. That matters because we are often trained to trust information only after a laboratory speaks, while ignoring the fact that lived knowledge often arrives first and is often more accurate than we give it credit for. Honeybush is one of those cases where ancestral practice and modern analysis point in the same direction. If you decide to try this, start small. 1 shrub is enough to teach you. 2 shrubs let you compare. 3 or 4 begin to give you continuous production. Learn how the leaves smell before and after oxidation. Learn what fully dry plant material feels like when you crumble it between your fingers. Learn how the syrup changes during the final reduction, when the surface starts to look glossy instead of dull, and the bubbles become slower and thicker. These details sound small until you realize that this is exactly how mastery is built. Not in theory, in repetition, in attention, in making one batch slightly better than the last and remembering what you changed. A plant that has been documented for more than 3 centuries, that has fed and comforted communities for far longer than that, that grows in poor soil, that asks for almost nothing, that produces a sweetener you can store on a shelf and use in your kitchen, is not a curiosity. It is a piece of forgotten infrastructure. And the only reason it has stayed forgotten in most of the world is that it does not fit neatly into a system that profits from your dependence. A shrub that lives for a decade and gives you syrup every season is not exciting to a market that needs you to keep buying, but it is enormously valuable to you. You now know the name of this plant. You know where it came from. You know why it stayed hidden. You know the soil it prefers, how to germinate the seeds, how to root the cuttings, how to harvest, how to oxidize, how to dry, and how to reduce the extraction into a golden syrup at home. That is more than most people will ever learn about honeybush. And the moment that knowledge enters your hands, it stops being hidden knowledge. It becomes a tool that belongs to you. The world rewards consumers with convenience and punishes them with dependence. The land works differently. The land rewards observation, patience, and memory. Honeybush has been waiting in the record for centuries, not because it needed to be invented, but because it needed someone to notice. If you found value in this video, subscribe to the channel and join us in the next one, because there are more forgotten plants waiting to be brought back into the conversation, and the next one might be the one that changes your kitchen forever.